To some other news now. Russia has celebrated the Soviet Union's victory in the Second World War with its annual Red Square military parade in Moscow. President Vladimir Putin used the occasion to lash out at Western powers, warning them that Moscow would not be threatened. The parade comes just days after Russia announced new tactical exercises with neighboring Belarus involving the practice deployment of tactical nuclear weapons.
A sea of uniformed bodies, all waiting for one man to arrive. Vladimir Putin, freshly sworn in for a record-breaking 5th term as Russia's president. After watching soldiers parade through the unseasonal May snow on Moscow's Red Square, Putin returned to familiar territory, warning the West that Russia was ready for conflict and even nuclear war.
Russia will do everything to prevent global confrontation. But at the same time, we will not allow anyone to threaten us. Our strategic forces are always on alert.
Once again, he also used the backdrop of the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany to justify his current war in Ukraine. Putin has repeatedly baselessly accused the Ukrainian government of being run by neo-Nazis. Some watching in the crowd were clearly in agreement with their long-time leader.
We are striving now for victory against fascism, and we are directly involved in this, and we have been.
We must always learn from the past and remember what our grandfathers did for us, and that we must do the same now.
The fruits of Putin's efforts to twist the past in his favor were also on display at the end of the parade, where once he was joined by German chancellors and UN secretaries general, this year no Western leader came to lay flowers alongside Russia's president.
Our correspondent Fanny Fachat joins us from Riga. What else did Putin have to say?
I think it's very important to point out, first of all, that it is a very emotional day for millions of Russians, for millions of Ukrainians who lost their relatives in that war when they were fighting side by side against Nazi Germany. And now Russia's President Putin is actually using those emotions to paint a picture that history is repeating itself, allegedly, being under attack, allegedly, by the West. He went on to say, quote, that the truth about World War II is being distorted by the West, and he also said that the future of, quote, the motherland depends on us, depends on Russia. Very similar remarks were made actually 2 days ago during his inauguration speech when he spoke about, quote, historic land that needs to be protected. So it's basically repeating over and over again this very same narrative or this very same propaganda that is trying to sell this war, if you like, the ongoing war in Ukraine, as something that has to be done in order to make sure that Russia is defending itself against what he calls is an alleged attack by the West. Now, what I find quite interesting that he didn't talk about mobilization, he didn't talk about further mobilization amongst the Russian society, and certainly he didn't say anything about just how long the war in Ukraine is going to continue.
Talking about repeats, last year's parade came amid big losses for Russia in the battlefield. What's the situation now?
Definitely, there was a symbolic victory taking in Avdiivka in Donetsk region this year in February, which used to be a town of more than 30,000 people before the war. And they're trying to really encircle Chasiv Yar, another strategically important town. Basically, not much exists anymore in Chasiv Yar. It used to be also a town about 13,000 people before the war. So they're trying to gain momentum here. And obviously, they've been using the time while Ukraine was waiting and has been waiting for weapons and military gear from the Western allies, using this time to make some gains. But overall, if you look at the map now, about 18% of Ukrainian territory is being controlled by Russia. And that number really didn't change much. So we're speaking about 1/5 of Ukrainian territory being under control by Russian forces. The question is, from now on, as this is the 3rd year of the war, how things are going to change on the ground as soon as the weapons arrive. And also, if you listen to what Putin actually said right after the speech, that these nuclear drills are going to continue, the question is just about further escalation and what Russia has learned during these past 2 years from the war in Ukraine, how they're going to change tactics. We do not know what's for sure certain, and unfortunately also for the millions of ordinary citizens who are bearing the brunt in Ukraine, that the war is going to continue for quite some time.
And something else that hasn't changed, Western leaders staying away from those Victory Day celebrations yet again.
Exactly. In fact, the Foreign Ministry of Russia made clear that those so-called, quote, unfriendly states are not welcome. And what I found quite bizarre here, actually, that the so-called friendly countries, I'm speaking about former Soviet states, for example, like Armenia and Azerbaijan, they were invited, but their leaders didn't come. Prime Minister Pashinyan, the Prime Minister of Armenia, and we just recently came back from Armenia, actually criticized Russia's President Putin over failing to protect ethnic Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. So even though the war is continuing in Ukraine, that does mean that geopolitical interests and strategies on the ground do not change, for example, in the South Caucasus.
You heard it from our very own Fanny Facha.
All right, we want to pull in now our Russia analyst, Konstantin Egert. Konstantin, it's good to see you. You know, these military parades, they can be almost like performative art, if you will. And I'm wondering, do events like these, do they still bolster support for the war among Russians?
Look, Brett, it's difficult to say. Of course, people like these shows. They remind the majority of Russians that theirs is still a great country. It is all designed to inspire pride, although, frankly speaking, some of the weapons that were shown, especially aircraft, were old even when I served in the army in the late 80s. But this whole thing is not the point of so much inspiring the population, which is largely indifferent, or rather tries to keep its own counsel. It is a way of also impacting the outside world, and that's quite interesting. For example, one of the independent Russian websites, investigative websites, discovered, and it's been out now on Russian social media in the last few hours, that the three officers that we see sitting behind Putin are those that took part in assault on Kiev in 2022, and one of them definitely belongs to a unit that has been already accused of war crimes. So read the symbolism. We are not going to surrender. We're going to do whatever we feel we want to do. And in this respect, it is very much an in-your-face show, defines all this parade and all this symbolism that is attached to it.
I want to ask you, too, about the connection with Belarus tonight. Vladimir Putin says that there's nothing unusual about nuclear drills taking place with Belarus. He announced that earlier this week. What's your take on that?
Well, of course it is unusual. It's not every day or even every year that you have drills that involve the use of nuclear weapons. And here it's very specific. Tactical nuclear weapons, i.e. Those that are not allegedly going to start World War II, but just something that's going to tickle the nerves in Lithuania, Poland, Latvia, maybe Finland. It is, of course, one of those threats that Putin is using recently because, frankly speaking, his situation is not great. The U.S. approved massive aid to Ukraine. The West seems to be intent in outperforming him in the arms race, so he resorts to his usual tactics, that is nuclear blackmail.
Yeah, nuclear blackmail, that certainly gets the West's attention, that's for sure. DW's Konstantin Egert. Konstantin, as always, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Russians living here in Berlin, they also celebrate May 9th as Victory over Nazi Germany Day. Remembrance events are held across the German capital, but this year police were out in force to prevent the spread of any propaganda backing the war in Ukraine.
Sharing the same ground, but far apart in ideology. Ceremonies in Berlin marking the Soviet victory over Nazi Germany have become more political than ever since Russia invaded Ukraine.
We're in Germany, and we think the instrumentalization of this historical remembrance for today's war against Ukraine is wrong.
Russian symbols were banned around the commemoration, and yet some were on display.
It's my country's flag. I was born there. I was raised there.
This flag is a symbol for liberation from fascism.
Also present, diplomats, including the ambassadors from Russia and its ally Belarus, as well as Russian Orthodox priests. Around 900 police were on hand to ensure public safety, with only a few minor scuffles marring the commemoration.